Okay, so Bill, we've spoken on and off over the past few months, and the events of the past week in the American Capitol made you feel that there was something that we need to express to our own students and to people in our world, in our sphere, that is somewhat different, distinct from the polyphony of views that have been offered from almost every thinker and every media outlet in the West. So you started sharing. I saw some Arnold Schwarzenegger old movies, and I take it as this was not the Terminator.
No, it's not the Terminator. There is that great scene in one of the Schwarzenegger movies where they're watching Hamlet and we see Hamlet delaying, and Arnold Schwarzenegger takes out his like M16 and just blows Claudius away. That is a terrific scene, and it shows the way in which literature is still relevant and does affect our lives. So I said to my children that if I was sharing with them a Schwarzenegger video, it must be significant. Now, if those of you who haven't seen it, he compares what has been happening in America to what was happening in the 30s in Germany. And of course, there have been people who are getting their licks in and on social media and want to say that, of course, it was different. And parallels with the Nazis are always in some ways inappropriate because it takes away the specificity of that event. And in order really to understand that event and why we should be careful in the present, one has to understand the specificity of that event. But Schwarzenegger, I mean, he's an Austrian, and he says he lived through it and he remembers it. And I think that we take for granted too much the idea that our status quo has always been here and will always continue to be here. And all of the freedoms that allow us to do things like protest and march are part of a very specific experiment that we've been part of for a very, very long time. And I know for both you and I, neither one of us wants to say or gloat, as people have said I have been on social media, and gloat and say we've been right all along. Of course, we have been right all along, but we haven't been right all along about saying our political side is right. We've been right all along about talking about the fragility of the democratic experiment. And that's important here as well, because there are threats to democracy in this country as well. And we have to be aware of what that looks like. And I guess my question to you, Daniel, since you know so much about the World War II, is are we doing better now than they did in Weimar Germany to keep Hitler? They did not keep Hitler down. And I've been reading the novels of Thomas Mann, and you really see in his novels, especially Dr. Faustus and even Magic Mountain and Joseph and his brothers, that he is really recording the history of Europe in the 20th century and the history of Germany. And I'm wondering, to the extent, how you feel. Are our democratic institutions stronger than they were in Weimar? Apparently, yes, I would say, on one foot.
Yes, they are. And it's a very impassioned statement that you make. I'm not a historian. People like Tim Snyder, who have been out front for years about this, indeed are. And the diagnosis, the parallels are haunting, and they are inappropriate about hollowing out media, attacking, taking civil rights for granted, exploiting economic uncertainty, and casting blame on others, underclass, outsiders. The one great benefit that we have today, not only in the sense that our prosperity is much greater, our institutions are indeed stronger, the tradition of democracy is more venerable, is older, but the greatest benefit is that we have history, and history does not repeat. No one, even Schwarzenegger, is saying this is not my father's experience of Kristallnacht happening all over again. It's that we can learn. It enlightens. History does not repeat, but it does enlighten, illuminate, and set an example for us. The point that you and I have been making about the fragility is certainly something that, if anything, I would say I was even wrong. Yes, we were right to talk about that, and we've been talking about it for now 5 years, 6 years now, you and I. But that, if anything, I was wrong. The events of the past week, the insurrection, the takeover of the brief takeover of the Capitol, told me that despite having been concerned, those concerns, at least for me personally, I can say, were too modest. And I think back not just to what the Jewish experience and the relationship towards Galut, the relationship towards Malchut Adina, those stories. I was thinking not just about the American Jewish experience, but about what is happening here in our country, in Israel, and how so many people think that the establishment of the state of Israel is almost an exit from history, that we've achieved a new stage, we've established a thriving, flourishing, strong country. All of that is true, with a resolute, very inventive, and strong army. But that what Jewish tradition teaches is how precious all of this is, how often evanescent, if you think better, from a divine perspective, how short-lived everything is, but also how important it is to invest, to bolster, to buttress, and to protect, to maintain, and to remain true to the core values that, as Yirmiyahu, as our Nevi'im tell us over and over again, that is your only defense. And
I think that's really important, Ben. I think part of the things that we're doing with our students, and we're teaching first-year students at Bar Ilan, is that we have been together, and I think really looking back at the way we've developed a curriculum together, is we've been telling this story of Western civilization, and there are stories. Part of it is stories of conquest, but there is a story that we've been telling from the beginning of individual liberty, of autonomy, of freedom of expression. We see that in various forms in different cultures, and we continue to tell that story. I'm teaching now a Renaissance class where the story that we're teaching to our first years, which really focuses, for me at least, on the classics, continues with Shakespeare and Milton, and we see the further development of individualism and the individual ideal. And then really, I've been thinking about this more and more, there is that catastrophe. And the catastrophe is of the 17th century Civil War. And in the Civil War, the 18th century looks back at what happens in the middle of the 17th century. And they put on their wigs and they go into coffee salons because they want to civilize themselves and be as far as possible from what they see as the energies of radical revolution. They see from the point of view of the 18th century what happens when cultures that ostensibly are about love and truth become so intolerant that they can't tolerate other cultures. And it's not an accident that the great figures of liberalism come out of that English tradition, by which I mean the founding fathers, and also really primarily John Locke. And John Locke writes a letter of toleration. We started talking about this a couple of years ago. Maybe we should go back to it. That Locke realizes, and in a way, he's the most uninspiring, sober figure you could imagine, because all of the enthusiasms that people have, he wants to not put a lid on, but he wants to put them in the private sphere, because he wants to save people. He wants to save people from killing each other. And I think that insight is one that's really important for us now. There are people on the right, obviously, we saw that last week. There are people on the left, we've seen that for years, right? It's very important, I think, for us to say, we are not Smolanim, right? We are not saying our party is right. What we are saying is that this liberal experiment, which was once embraced by left and right, has to be rejuvenated. And we're doing our best to do that, I think. That's to me what our students should hear, is that we are part of that we are part of that continued tradition or history. And our ability to try to talk to each other is a way in which we are enacting that vision ourselves and hopefully being inspirations to others.
Yeah, that's very eloquent. I would only end with an oft-cited poem at moments of fragility, precariousness, of threat, of September 1st, 1939, the beginning of the World War II, which is also the title of a very famous poem by Auden, encapsulating a lot of the themes that you were referring to and that we attempt to convey to our students in our program. In the middle of the poem, Auden writes, "Exiled Thucydides knew all that a speech can say about democracy, and what dictators do, the elderly rubbish they talk to an apathetic grave, analyzed all in his book, The Enlightenment, driven away. the habit-forming pain, mismanagement, and grief, we must suffer them all again. Into this neutral air where blind skyscrapers use their full height to proclaim the strength of collective man, each language pours its vain competitive excuse. But who can live for long in a euphoric dream? Out of the mirror they stare, imperialism's face and international wrong. And that is the poem that comes to the end with, we must love one another or die. Now, we're not Christians. We don't necessarily believe in loving one another, but tolerating, listening, respecting one another is our core, our cardinal belief.
And you know what? I think we give up that euphoric dream for the possibility of life and smaller, more modest dreams.
And that is our tradition, yeah. V'charta b'chaim. Okay, not the nihilism of preserving democracy by destroying it, by, I will help you live by killing you, but uvacharta b'chaim in all its strength and all its challenge as well.
Beautiful.
Take care.